Senate will come back to order. The Senate will come back to order. It's the ruling of the chair that the House amendment is germane and that the subject matter of SB 202 is the administration of elections. The House amendment covers the administration of elections, including the technical details of elections and the appointment of elected officials. Likewise, the single subject matter of SB 202 is the administration of elections. Additionally, it is the ruling of the chair that a fiscal note is not required and that there is no significant fiscal impact to the state. For what purpose does the senator from the 42nd rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Isn't it true that a vote on this matter is illegal and out of order under 28.549 of OCGA, which requires a fiscal note when there is a fiscal impact on local political subdivisions? That's in addition to OCGA 28.542 that does require a fiscal note if there is an election, a fiscal impact on the State Elections Board or the Secretary of State's office, both of which this legislation significantly impacts.
As mentioned, it's the ruling of the chair that the fiscal note is not required and that there's no significant fiscal impact to the state.
I asked about fiscal impact under 28.549, which does not deal with the state, Mr. President.
That's the local one.
Senate will come back to order. It is the ruling of the chair that based on the information available, the dollar threshold stated in the code section will not be met, and therefore no fiscal note is required. State your inquiry.
There was numerous testimony, and I have numerous documents right here at my desk demonstrating that the impact is well more than $5 million.
It's the ruling of the chair that that would not be met.
So you probably further
State your inquiry.
It is your unilateral ruling that there is not a cost to counties or political subdivisions or cities of $5 million in the aggregate. You are making that decision yourself. That's my question.
The chair has ruled on the matter. Chair recognizes the senator from the 23rd to present his motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, I bring to you the House substitute to Senate Bill 202. This is a reasoned, well thought out, collaborative effort from both bodies that dramatically expands voter access. It provides consistency for absentee balloting, early voting. It provides the opportunity for us to ensure that our elections are secure. As I walk you through the process, I want you to note that voter identification is consistent in all forms of voting, absentee, early, and on election day. It provides oversight for our local elections board as well as for our state election board. It provides them with authority to ensure that elections are conducted in Georgia in a consistent and legal manner. It provides poll watching at both the voting precincts and at the tabulation centers. It ensures a chain of custody for all election processes. Our goal is to ensure election integrity and to restore or confirm confidence in the election process. As we look carefully at the legislation, I want to point out a few things. First of all, it is the result of a concerted effort between both the Senate and the House of Representatives to consolidate ideas involving reforms to the election process into one comprehensive bill. This bill includes provisions of Senate Bill 241 and House Bill 531, as well as provisions from numerous other bills considered in both the Senate and the House. This bill includes a vast amount of the provisions that we in this chamber adopted as Senate Bill 241, as well as provisions that the Ethics Committee passed as a substitute to House Bill 531. Included in Senate Bill 202 are topics that are important to all Georgians. A hotline in the Attorney General's office for any elector who is concerned about inappropriate or illegal election activities. A notice provision that any settlement entered into by the Secretary of State must be communicated to the judiciary committees of both the House and the Senate. A mechanism for counties to be held accountable for all actions relating to election processing, and for the State Board of Election, where necessary, to appoint a temporary superintendent to replace an election superintendent at the county level where problems have been seen over time. The process in this bill is similar, that process in this bill is similar to the current process that we use for problem school systems, where we require a specific finding to avoid any particular partisan manipulation. There's a vehicle in this bill that ensures the accountability of the election process. Various provisions in the bill were a part of Senate Bill 241. They include a number of provisions from our colleagues, Senator from the 9th, Senate Bill 253 is included for notification. Senate Bill 40 from the Senator from the 6th to allow early voting processing, but not tabulation. And then from Senator from the 20th, we have the ability to ensure that the signature match is replaced with a ID identifier, which is the voter's driver's license number or a voter registration number or the last 4 digits of their Social Security number with their birth date. As we continue to look at the bill contains provisions that were in both environments. We've talked about the driver's license. There's also a disclaimer language on the absentee ballot. I think that's important. We received a number of absentee ballot applications that appeared to be coming from a more official source. This requires disclaimer language on an absentee ballot application from third parties. It requires that third parties, when they mail out absentee ballot applications, that they first check with the Secretary of State's database to eliminate any duplications. And most importantly, this legislation significantly expands voter access on weekends. If you look carefully at the bill, you will see that weekend voting is not only permitted, but is required. So 2 Saturdays are required and 2 Sundays are optional. So we have additionally provided in code the ability for every community to expand voting access. There is no limitation to voting on weekends in this bill. The legislation also dramatically increases the total number of hours that Georgians can vote. It provides certainty for all Georgians and ensures a greater security of our election system. Finally, SB 202 contains various provisions which were included in House Bill 531 that was vetted through the Senate Ethics Committee, allows Election Day poll watchers to be from adjoining counties, to make sure that we have full and complete and capable staffing there. It ensures that we provide additional oversight from poll watchers to tabulation centers. It addresses the issue of what is commonly referred to as line warming. It allows for water to be distributed by polling officials within 150 feet and allows non-polling officials to provide water or food support beyond 150 feet. We had a lot of questions and concerns in prior election cycles. And our challenge in this environment is to restore or ensure the confidence in the voting process. I'd like to call your attention to Section 2 of the bill. Begins briefly on page 3, but it effectively provides the basis for this legislation. I'd just like to share that with you so that you understand why this legislation is brought. Beginning on line 69, I'll back up one line, 68. The General Assembly finds and declares that, number one, following the 2018 and 2020 elections, there was a significant lack of confidence in Georgia's election systems, with many electors concerned about allegations of rampant voter suppression and many electors concerned about allegations of rampant voter fraud. Number two, many Georgia election processes were challenged in court, including the subject of a signature matching requirement by Georgians on all sides of the political spectrum before and after the 2020 general election. The stress of the 2020 elections, with a dramatic increase in absentee by mail ballots and pandemic restrictions, demonstrated where there were opportunities to update existing processes to reduce the burden on election officials and boost voter confidence. The changes made in this legislation in 2021 are designed to address the lack of elector confidence in the election system on all sides of the political spectrum, to reduce the burden on election officials, and to streamline the processes for conducting elections in Georgia by promoting uniformity in voting. Several examples will help explain how these goals are achieved. The broad discretion allowed to local officials to advance voting dates and hours led to significant variations across the state in the total number of hours of advanced voting, depending on the county. More than 100 counties have never offered voting on Sunday, and many counties offered only a single day of weekend voting. This bill requires 2 Saturday voting days and 2 optional Sunday voting days. This will dramatically increase the total voting hours for voters across the state of Georgia. And all electors in Georgia will have access to multiple opportunities to vote in person on the weekend for the first time. Some counties in 2020 received significant infusions of grant funding for election operations, while other counties received no such funds. Promoting uniformity in the distribution of funds to election operations will boost voter confidence and ensure there is no political advantage conferred by preferring certain counties over others in the distribution of funds. Number 7, elections in Georgia are administered by counties, but that can lead to problems for voters in counties with dysfunctional election systems. Counties with long-term problems of lines, problems with processing of absentee ballots, and other challenges in administration need accountability, but state officials are limited in what they are able to do to address these problems. Ensuring there is a mechanism to address local election problems will promote confidence and meet the goal of uniformity. Elections are a public process, and public participation is encouraged by all involved. But the enthusiasm of some outside groups in sending multiple absentee ballot applications in 2020 often incorrectly filled in voter information and then led to significant confusion of electors. Clarifying the rules regarding absentee ballot applications will build elector confidence while not sacrificing the opportunities for electors to participate in the process. The lengthy absentee ballot process also led to elector confusion, including electors who were told that they'd already voted when they arrived to vote in person. Creating a definite period of absentee voting will assist electors in determining the election process while also ensuring that opportunities to vote are not diminished, especially when many absentee ballots issued in the last few days before the election were not successfully voted or returned too late. Number 10, opportunities for delivering absentee ballots to a drop box were first created by the State Election Board as a pandemic response. The drop boxes created by rule no longer existed in Georgia law when emergency rules that created them expired. The General Assembly considered a variety of options and constructed a system that allows for the use of drop boxes while also ensuring the security of the system and providing options in emergency situations. Number 11, the lengthy 9-week runoffs in 2020 were exhausting for candidates, for donors, for electors, and by making a ranked choice voting for military and overseas voters, the runoff period can be shortened to a more manageable period for all involved, easing the burden on election officials and on electors. Number 12, counting absentee ballots in 2020 took an incredibly long time in some counties. Creating processes for early processing and scanning of absentee ballots will promote elector confidence by ensuring the results are reported quickly. The sanctity of the precinct also brought into sharp focus in 2020, with many groups approaching electors while they waited in line. Protecting electors from improper interference, from political pressure or intimidation while waiting in line to vote is of paramount importance to protecting the election system and ensuring elector confidence. Ballot duplication for provisional ballots and other purposes places a heavy burden on election officials. The number of duplicated ballots has continued to rise dramatically from 2016 to 2020. Reducing the number of duplicated ballots will significantly reduce the burden on election officials, and creating bipartisan panels to conduct duplication will promote elector confidence. Electors voting, number 15, electors voting out of precinct add to a burden on election officials and lines for other electors because of the length of time it takes to process a provisional ballot in a precinct. Electors should be directed to the correct precinct on election day to ensure that they have the opportunity to vote in all elections for which they are eligible. Number 16, in considering the changes to the 20 and 21, the General Assembly heard literally hours of testimony from electors, election officials, and attorneys that involved in voting. The General Assembly made significant modifications through the legislative process as it weighed the various interests involved, including adding further weekend voting, changing parameters for out-of-precinct voting, and adding transparency for ballot images. While each of the changes in this legislation in 2021 stands alone and is severable under Code Section 1-1-3, the changes in total reflect the General Assembly's considered judgment on the changes required to Georgia's election process to make it easy to vote and hard to cheat, applying the lessons learned from conducting an election in 2020 pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, our goals are straightforward. Our goal is to ensure that every legal vote counts. Our second objective is to make sure that every one of our 159 counties follow Georgia law consistently and completely. And finally, our goal is to ensure that voters in Georgia have confidence in the election process. As you review this bill, as you study it carefully, and as you understand its components, I hope you will agree that this is a solid step in the right direction to provide voter integrity in Georgia. Mr. President, I yield for questions.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 10th for a question.
Would the senator yield?
Absolutely, to my good friend from the 10th.
Thank you, Senator. I just have a few questions, so if you will indulge me for a moment, please.
Certainly.
I noticed in here that the Secretary of State's role seemed to be diminished in this legislation. Can you explain why?
The Secretary, it's unusual for the Secretary of State to also chair the State Election Board, as that has been the practice, as you know. This legislation would allow the General Assembly to select the chairman of the State Election Board. The other four officials would be as currently selected. The current Secretary of State would be an ex officio member. This is consistent with the State Board of Education's board, and the Superintendent of Education. It's consistent with the Georgia Department of Transportation's organizational structure and the Board of Regents, just to provide a couple, three examples. So it is designed to provide more citizen oversight in our election process.
Senator Yield?
Certainly.
Senator, let's talk a moment about the election process of that superintendent, if you will, is selected by both the Senate and the House.
Correct.
How do you guarantee that person's going to be nonpartisan when we are, in fact, a partisan body?
Well, excellent question, Senator. I think the challenge is going to be for each body to agree on the individual that will chair our state election board. I would suggest to you that the current Secretary of State is a partisan elected official. This gives both bodies the opportunity to choose someone that they are confident in that can chair the election process in Georgia.
Senator, further yield?
Yes, sir.
Wouldn't one way of assuring that this person would be nonpartisan would make the vote at least 2/3 rather than a simple majority?
I appreciate the Senator's input. It's not a part of this particular legislation, but I accept that as a suggestion for future consideration. Thank you.
Senator, further yield?
Yes, sir.
Senator, let's talk about the AG's role in
Yep.
all of this. I noticed that the AG is still responsible for administration of a hotline. Is that correct?
That is correct. There's the establishment of a hotline. It's the AG's responsibility to allow a voter, an elector, to potentially, who feels that there's a potential issue, to report it directly to the AG.
Senator Furtherhill?
Yes, sir.
Is there an opportunity that the AG would politicize an election, considering the behavior of our current AG?
Sir, I would not speak to that. I would suggest to you that the Attorney General's responsibility is to enforce the law. I have confidence that he will do just that.
Senator, are you concerned about the behavior of our Attorney General in this most recent election?
No, sir, I'm not concerned about the Attorney General or any other constitutionally elected official.
Senator Furtherhill?
One more question, Senator. You may have more friends in the background who want to challenge me.
Senator, I have lots of other
I
questions.
thought you might.
And I certainly would appreciate it if you would indulge.
Absolutely. Please, I'm happy to, Senator. Thank you.
Senator, I notice in your legislation that and I'm trying to find the exact place on here, but there seems to be an error. And I'm looking over on page 13.
Page 13, line number.
And I'm starting at line 313.
Yes, sir.
That line reads, the majority of members of a board of elections and et cetera, may petition the Secretary of State. I believe in there you probably meant your superintendent to continue the deliberations. Is that correct, Senator?
I'd have to review that and seek legal counsel. Let me assure the Senator that this legislation has been vetted multiple times by individuals very capable and competent in election law. If you would be happy to point out that specifically, I will certainly address the issue.
Over on line 315, it says that the commissioner and et cetera, may petition the Secretary of State to continue any hearing. I don't see anywhere in your legislation where it says the Secretary of State has the hearing. It's your superintendent that's holding those hearings. So why would that line, why would they have to petition the Secretary of State when he has no role in this governing board?
Well, the Secretary of State is still the administrative officer for all elections, and he works hand in hand with the state election board. I think what you will see here, that these are options for local governments to request that their election officials be evaluated, a performance review, and then if appropriate or if needed, that those problems could be addressed up to and including the removal of the local election board. I'd like to point out that this legislation includes a restriction that can only occur in 4 instances at any given time. I would suggest that in our prior use of this type of legislation in our school boards, that happens extremely rarely, and we would anticipate that this would be a very rare occurrence.
Senator Yield?
Yes, sir.
Senator, on the next line on 316, it says, upon assuring a good faith, the state election board may continue the hearing. So there's a conflict, a definite conflict in your language in this legislation.
I appreciate the Senator's input, and again, I'd be happy to take that up with legislative counsel, but I'm confident that this legislation is appropriately and correctly prepared.
I respectfully disagree, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 53rd for a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Yield.
Absolutely.
Let me first, Senator, thank you for your work and the work of your committee and others on this important piece of legislation.
Thanks, Senator.
Isn't it true that your effort is a result of you listening to your constituents and constituents all over the state of Georgia?
It has indeed, and I'd just like to point out to the chamber that the Ethics Committee had 18 meetings, including 15 full committee meetings and 3 subcommittee meetings. We considered over 30 pieces of legislation. We adopted out of committee about 18 of those, and this body passed 12.
It's amazing work. Thank you. Isn't it further true, Senator, that you're trying to restore voter confidence in all parts of Georgia, and especially in northwest Georgia. And let me thank you for that.
Especially in southeast Georgia, Senator, but I do appreciate your comments. Thank you. And again, I think the senator speaks correctly in the fact that this is about election integrity. It's about providing opportunities for every Georgian to vote and to vote securely and to vote with confidence.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 26th for a question.
Senator Yield.
Absolutely, my good friend from Macon.
Senator, how many times were the votes counted in the presidential primary?
I believe that there were 3 recounts in the presidential primary, sir, if that's correct. I think that's correct.
Where was the fraud?
Well, I think the challenge is not in the fact that the votes were counted incorrectly. They were counted correctly. The challenge is in whether the votes themselves were legitimate. And that's why you see in this bill the absentee ballot process that ensures that the same identification requirements for an absentee ballot that you would have if you were to go to the polls to vote early or to vote on election day. And candidly, Senator, our goal is to ensure that people feel confident in voting in person. And we're hopeful that that the pandemic will have subsided and that folks will return to the polling precincts.
Senator, further Yield.
Yes, sir.
Senator, the signature match. We were in court with the signature match. Isn't it true that people who were disqualified might have been disqualified because there might have been an E as a middle initial, and it might have been showed up as an L, and were not told what the problem was, but were told that their application was rejected?
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate the question. I believe you may be correct. I think the most important thing about this bill is it eliminates the subjective evaluation of a signature and provides an absolute identification number that is unique to the voter. 98% of Georgia voters have a driver's license. The other 2 or 3% would have the opportunity to receive at no cost a voter registration card, and then of course they could use, if they choose to, the last 4 digits of their Social Security number and their date of birth. So I think that the opportunity here is for voters to be identified accurately without question.
Isn't it true that you get a voter registration card? When you register, they send you a card and tell you what precincts you vote at?
The senator knows what he speaks. That is correct, Senator.
Senator, further Yield.
Yes, sir.
Isn't it true that most of the things that you are talking about had to be done because we were in court trying to straighten out those voters who were removed from the voter rolls, and that the courts are the one that required us to do certain things?
Senator, I can't speak to that. I can speak to the fact that this legislation was brought by both chambers independently and then collectively to ensure that every legal voter in Georgia, their vote is protected and that our process is secure and fair.
Senator, further Yield, are you saying to us that those folks that voted in the election were illegitimate voters?
No, sir, at all. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that we have to be able to verify that every voter has appropriately registered and currently resides at their voting address and is eligible to vote. Now, they may be temporarily out of their local area, but that is their permanent resident. So our goal is to secure our election process, Senator. Other questions?
Chair recognizes the senator from the 17th for a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Yield.
Yes, sir.
Senator, I want to go back to line 315 and line 317.
Thank you.
As the senator from the 10th was asking you earlier. Isn't it true that if we look back actually on line 288 of the bill on page 12, it confirms that the state election board is actually served through the Secretary of State. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
And so when we have on line 315 the petitioning of the Secretary of State, and then we have the actions noted of the state election board on line 317. It's actually written correctly, right?
That is, the senator knows what he speaks.
Do you further yield?
Absolutely.
Senator, isn't it true this is your first year in the Senate?
It certainly is, and I'm just delighted to have this privilege, Senator. Thank you.
Well, do you further yield?
Yes, Senator, I do.
Isn't it true that as a freshman and a senator, you took on the role of being the chairman of the ethics committee, and you spent hours upon hours at some very early hours at hearing these bills and hearing from many, many people who came to testify in front of you, and you were very respectful to everybody that came in the room, let everybody be heard many different opinions about all these different election bills, worked through all this, and then today, here on day 38, you bring us a bill that is a compromise bill, but it has input from senators on both sides of the aisle. That's something we all should be to get behind in this body.
I thank the senator for his comments. I'd like to note that the senator from the 17th was in every Senate Ethics Committee meeting. I greatly appreciate his contributions.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 42nd for a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the senator yield?
Yes, I'd be happy to yield.
So I believe in this legislation, the appointments to the State Elections Board are pretty dramatically changed, and the legislature would now command a majority of the appointments to the Elections Board. Is that correct?
The only change to the State Election Board is to the chairman. The other appointments remain the same. Now, the senator is correct in the fact that the chairman would now be selected by the legislature.
Senator, please give me your thoughts on this question. I don't see this as similar to the DOT, and here's why. The way elections are done and run impact us directly. So having us oversee our own, the people that oversee our own elections presents a conflict of interest and would allow us to interfere and commandeer local boards if we didn't like the elections results. Isn't that true?
Just as a point of reference, the senator's time has expired in the well. I'll allow him to answer the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I would say that the objective here is to provide open and fair elections. Again, as I stated earlier, it is unlikely but possible for local election boards to be removed and put into a temporary status where they would have an appointed superintendent to correct any challenges or problems they had, and then to return the responsibility back over to the local election board. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
Senator has yielded the well. The chair recognizes the senator from the 6th to speak to the measure. Motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. So one of the most interesting things that was said by my friend from the 23rd was the fact that this bill that we are considering is something that that comes from this body, that has been considered by this body, that it has been just combed over by the members of the Ethics Committee, and we've all come together, to create this. The problem is that that's not correct with respect to this bill. Because it comes from the House, and because the senator from the 23rd, who was the original sponsor of the bill, and I believe it was 2 pages, it was stripped, and now it's 95 pages. 95 pages that haven't been vetted by the Ethics Committee of this body. A bill that we haven't heard testimony on. Now, don't get me wrong, there are portions of this bill, because let me tell you something, it is like the Christmas tree of goodies in terms of voter suppression. And let's be clear, some of the most dangerous provisions have to do with the takeover of the local elections boards, but not only that, but at the state election board level. So what are y'all doing? What are y'all doing? We're going to take the Secretary of State, who is in charge of administering our elections, who is elected statewide, a statewide constitutional officer elected by the people of this state, who has been charged with the administration of elections, and we are going to say, sorry, you just take a seat. You're just going to be kind of like ex officio non-voting. You can show up if you want, but it really won't matter at the end of the day. And then we're going to appoint our own chair to come from this body, which then, as the senator from the 23rd recognized, would then mean that 3 out of the 5 members would be appointed from this body. We, not me, I wish it were, but the majority party in the Senate and the House would effectively control the state election board. So then it gets worse, because then you've got this performance review board that comes in and is gonna, go over, these bad local elections boards to try to get them in line, right? Well, they issue a report, and then the counties can't even appeal those decisions effectively. How? You say, well, it says it's subject to the Administrative Procedures Act. Well, it prevents counties from using county money to pay attorney's fees for that appeal. So at that point, you have a county who has a bad decision that basically has suspended their board of elections, and there may even be sanctions involved, and they can't even appeal it to a superior court unless they come out of pocket. And I don't know about y'all, but a lot of these small counties, people don't have money to be paying lawyers to deal with performance reviews appeals to the superior court. I will suggest to you that the whole point of that is to make sure that there isn't a review, that no one ever actually looks at what is going on. There's been a lot of talk about integrity. This is about the integrity of the vote, integrity of elections. We want to provide opportunities for people to vote. This bill is absolutely about opportunities. But it ain't about the opportunity to vote. It is about the opportunity to keep control and to keep power at any cost. I wish I could go line by line, but it's fairly long. And I can tell you what I have read, there's a lot of mistakes in here that's going to cause a lot of trouble for local elections officials. This isn't going to make it easier. This is going to make it harder. I've been practicing law for 20 years. I've done election law. I've done election contests. I literally had to read this thing out loud like 5 times and ask my assistant, what does this mean? What are they trying to do here? This is not the product of considered work of this body. It's not. And it is okay if that is the will of the majority caucus, just to take whatever the House has sent over. But I will tell you that there are so many problems in this almost 100-page bill that it's going to come back at some point, and it's going to cause more problems because there's going to be litigation and there are going to be issues, and your local folks are going to have no idea what's going on. And not only that, but it's going to cost tons and tons of money. I know y'all want to get something done. I know y'all want to be able to deliver something for your constituents. But y'all could have done a lot better than this. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes the Minority Leader to speak to the measure.
I almost have to get undressed to take this thing off. Hearing aids come out, everything. Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Senate. I first want to comment on the original 202. The bill that was going to make a good correction, I think, so that citizens wouldn't receive so many applications for their absentee ballot. But in that original 202 was a penalty if the organization that sent out the application, they would be penalized. They would be charged a fee for sending out too many. And I thought that was a bit unreasonable to find an organization that wanted to simply help people vote. And because of that, I had to vote against that bill. And so I just wanted to mention that because the senator that was in the well that presented Senate Bill 202 used up all his time, so I couldn't ask the question. And the part that there are so many parts of this bill that I don't like, many of us don't like, but I'd like to talk about a couple of areas, and then I have some other comments. I particularly don't like the attack on absentee voting. First of all, it requires a photo ID and sensitive personal information for applications and ballots. You got to send your personal information. If you mailed it twice, or if you take it in the office, you got to use it twice. It disenfranchises voters without a driver's license or ID or access to a copier. Many homes don't have copiers that they can just arbitrarily copy some information and send it out. It creates opportunities for identity theft. And I mentioned that in committee, but it didn't seem to bother. I mean, it was okay that we would expose people, our seniors even, to identity theft, or even the physically disabled. This bill is vague about whether the Secretary of State's absentee ballot portal will accept uploads of all forms of valid photo ID. As I said about copiers, many homes don't have internet. They don't have laptops or computers. And it reminds me of something I was trying to do, and that was to do a signature for a person, and I had to upload it to the computer. And I got a person in another state that was helping me through the process. And it didn't take 5 or 10 minutes. It took me almost an hour to get that done because of the issues that we were having getting that done. And so this would be very challenging to, even if there was a way to upload something to a site. It creates an 11-day cutoff for ballot applications with no emergency provisions or notice for late submissions. For instance, Governor Kemp wouldn't have been able to vote in November under this provision. He requested his ballot the Friday before the election due to an unexpected COVID-19 quarantine. ACCG asked for the cutoff to be 1 week, 7 days before Election Day, not 11 days before Election Day. This bill does not provide meaningful notice to voters whose ballot applications come in after the deadline. It reduces the period for mailing and receiving ballots by over 40%. Current law requires ballots to be mailed out 49 to 45 days before an election. This bill requires mailing ballots 29 to 25 days before an election. This timeline delays ballots for the nearly 600,000 Georgians on the rollover absentee list who are, by definition, physically disabled or age 65 plus. Election offices would be severely burdened by the simultaneously demands of processing new voter registrations, mailing the initial batch of absentee ballots, and also absentee ballot drop boxes are rendered useless by placing them inside a voting location during voting hours. It increases the burden on disabled and senior voters. The drop boxes, in my opinion, was a great idea. It was, I think, one of the best things that happened in the 2020 elections, in 21 election, because it was so convenient for a person to drive up or walk up and drop their ballot in a drop box. Yes, it was an emergency order, and I think it's something that we can definitely keep and make it useful for the voters of this state. Recently, our U.S. Senator Reverend Raphael Warnock gave his first speech on the Senate floor last week. His comments were profound and seemed so fitting because this is an issue that he's definitely interested in. I hope I can do his words justice. For he was honored on a few occasions to stand with our hero and his parishioner, John Lewis. He was his pastor, but Reverend Warnock said he was clear that John Lewis was his mentor. On more than one occasion, they boarded buses together after church services as part of the Souls to the Polls, urging the Ebenezer Church family and communities of faith to participate in the democratic process. Not only Ebenezer Church, but many churches across the state. Now, with just a few months after Congressman Lewis's death, and may I add, the same John Lewis that was given the rare honor of having his body lie in state in this very Capitol, there are those in the Georgia legislature, some who dare to even praise his name, that are now trying to get rid of Sunday Souls to the Polls, preventing those who pray together to get on a bus together, to vote together. And I think that is wrong. As a matter of fact, I think that a vote is a kind of prayer for a kind of world we desire ourselves and for our children. To be sure, we've seen these kind of voter suppression tactics before. They are part of a long, shameful history in Georgia and throughout our nation. But refusing to be denied, Georgia citizens and citizens throughout this country brave the heat, the cold, rain, some standing in line for 5, 6 hours, sometimes 10 hours, just to exercise their constitutional right to vote. Young people, old people, sick people, working people, already underpaid, forced to lose wages, to pay a kind of poll tax while standing in line to vote. How do some politicians respond? Well, they are trying to make it a crime to give people water and a snack as they wait in lines that would obviously make lines longer by their draconian actions. Just think about that. They are the ones making the lines longer through these draconian actions. And then they want to make it a crime to bring grandma some water while she's waiting in line that they are making longer. Make no mistake, this is democracy in reverse. Some politicians did not approve of the choice made by the voters in a hard-fought election in which each side got the chance to make the case to the voters. And rather than adjusting its agenda, rather than changing their message, they're busy trying to change the rules. We are witnessing right now a massive and unabashed assault on voting rights, unlike anything we've seen since the Jim Crow era. Since the January election, some 250 voter suppression bills have been introduced by state legislatures all across the country, from Georgia to Arizona, from New Hampshire to Florida, using the big lie of voter fraud as a pretext for voter suppression. The same big lie that led to a violent insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. The day after Reverend Warnock's election, within 24 hours, we elected Georgia's first African American and Jewish senators. And hours later, the Capitol was assaulted. We see in just a few precious hours the tension very much alive in the soul of America. And the question before us all at every moment is, what shall we do to push us in the right direction? Surely there ought to be at least a majority in any legislative chamber who believe, as I do, that the four most powerful words uttered in a democracy are, the people have spoken. Therefore, we must assure that all the people can speak. But if not, we must still protect voting rights. The right to vote is preservative of all other rights. It is not just an issue alongside other issues. It is foundational. It is the reason why any of us has the privilege of standing here in the first place. It is about the covenant that we have with one another as an American people. E pluribus unum, out of many, one. It above all must be protected. In closing, and I probably won't close just right away, let me say that as a woman of faith, I believe that democracy is the political enactment of a spiritual idea, the sacred worth of all human beings, the notion that we all have within us a spark of the divine and the right to participate in the shaping of our destiny. John Lewis understood that and was beaten on a bridge defending it. Amelia Boynton, like so many women, not mentioned nearly enough, was gassed on the same bridge. A white woman by the name of Viola Louisa was killed. Medgar Evers was murdered in his own driveway. Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney, two were Jewish and an African American standing up for their sacred idea of democracy, also paid the ultimate price. And we in this body would be stopped and stymied by partisan politics, short-term political gain, legislative procedure. Instead of passing this legislation, I urge my colleagues to support a resolution urging Congress to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, among others, to strengthen and lengthen the cords of our democracy, thereby securing our credibility as the premier voice for freedom-loving people and democratic movements all over the world, and win the future for our children. Mr. President, I have spoken. I yield well.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 42nd to speak to the bill, the motion.
Thank you, Mr. President, colleagues. There was no widespread fraud in Georgia's recent elections. 3 recounts of the presidential, including a hand recount, demonstrated that definitively. But that has not stopped the total and complete fabrication that the election was stolen from President Trump from gaining traction among an astounding 70% of Republicans nationwide, and according to polls, 76% of Georgia Republicans who believe Donald Trump's lies. Members of this body are not the proximate cause of this problem, but do bear responsibility to be faithful to their constituents and tell them the truth about the status of democracy in Georgia, that there was no fraud. Filing a plethora of bills restricting voting is its own act of fraud. For members of this body in power to use a lie to justify anti-democratic acts, making it more difficult to vote, is a fraudulent and corrupt project. It is that simple. The elections were not stolen, but what is happening before our eyes right now is an effort to steal elections. Let's look at the state takeover of county elections in SB 202. As has been discussed, the legislature would now control the state elections board. I already mentioned when I was asking the chairman of ethics questions that was a conflict of interest when that body, the state elections board, actually oversees the electoral process leading to the election of each one of us. So that's obviously an inherent and complete conflict of interest that allows unprecedented meddling and therefore is not at all akin to the Department of Transportation and several of the other examples mentioned by the senator from the 23rd. The bill then sets an extremely low bar for state election board control. We control state election board. Then there's an extremely low bar for state election board to come in and control county elections. Any county governing authority, 2 members from a county legislative delegation, or the state election board that we control can, on its own motion, petition for the takeover. And as mentioned by the senator from the 6th, the county can't even pay for a lawyer to defend itself in front of the state elections board. Not that it would probably matter when we control the state elections board. It then authorizes the state elections board to make hiring and firing decisions during the takeover period. So the elections board is removed. The state elections board, controlled by us, puts one person into place in the place of the local county election board. That one person is then responsible for certifying the votes. That one person. And making weighty decisions about provisional ballots and things of that nature that happen on election day. So let's be really clear. We control the state elections board. The state elections board, or us, legislative delegations, remove the board at the county, and then the state elections board, again us, replaces that board with one person who will certify votes. And y'all are trying to say that that should inspire voter confidence that doesn't exist now? Huh? We control the whole process, including our own elections, and we can remove the board and stick in one dang person that can operate out of transparency by him or herself? And that is what we are putting out to Georgia, saying, look what we've done. We have restored confidence in the elections. Are you kidding me? I maybe have never heard something more far afield and nonsensical than that claim right here in this chamber. Changes to voting in SB 202 seem to be intended to disproportionately impact young voters and minority voters and help Republicans hold on to power in a changing Georgia. Let me remind you that that will not be the case. The best reason not to pass cynical voting bills predicated on a lie is that it will not work. It will not work. 75,000 people turned 18 between the November 3rd election and the January 6th runoff. 75,000. Suppressing voters rather than persuading them is not a long-term strategy for maintaining power in a changing Georgia. It is also not even a short-term strategy. What you are doing is demonstrating to the millions of Georgians out there that their vote is not wanted and they are riled up about that fact. Couple that with the 75,000 people turning 18 every 2 months, and you will see what a futile project it is to try to re-rig elections. Voters see through these bills, and they will become all the more determined to not let anyone or anything get in the way of their right to vote. Every time a majority tries to restrict voting or rig the electorate or gerrymander districts, it will ultimately backfire. The only way to gain and retain power is to win people over with the power of your ideas. But if Georgia voters see the party in power trying to win by making it more difficult to vote, let's just talk about the, oh, if I'm in a 4-hour line, no one can give me water. Again, I don't really understand where the majority party thinks that will hit the average Georgia voter, but clearly, again, does not pass any sort of test of a working brain. When voters see that, they assume that the majority party does not have confidence in its ideas, does not have confidence that its ideas can gain the approval of a majority of Georgia voters and cannot win fair and square. That is what then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that is the best reason to vote no on SB 202. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the ball.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 41st.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to speak on behalf of those who are often left out, people who are poor and people living with disabilities. I have taken this well before to name to this body that the free voter ID card that is provided to those people who cannot afford an ID is not included in this bill as a valid form of identification. So let me break this down to you. If you are poor, experiencing homelessness, then you can go to your local voter registration place and they will give you what's called a voter ID card. The title and section where a voter ID card is listed is not the same title and section of a driver's license or a state ID. It's a separate title and section. Therefore, if a person takes their voter ID card and goes in person to vote and uses that voter ID card to verify their ID, it will not count as an ID that is a part of the certified IDs. So they would therefore have to go through the process of having to add their birth date and the 4 digits of their social security card. This bill essentially renders those voter ID cards that we give to people who can't afford regular IDs, essentially renders them void and null. Additionally, when it comes to people who have disabilities, they've come out to these ethics committee meetings and they've spoken out about their needs. They've been clear. People who have low vision have talked about the fact that they want to be able to vote independently. And the way that you vote independently if you have low vision is that you use technology. The current machines that we have do not support them, so they've had to bring their phones in that have readers on them so that they could vote independently, secretly, like those of us who can see get to do. But this bill continues, despite their clear pleas about this, continues to criminalize the use of a phone inside of the voter ballot box. Furthermore, people living with disabilities made it clear that they liked the voting absentee drop boxes, not because they're fun, but because it's easier for someone who has a disability to simply roll down the window in their car and put it in the box, as opposed to having to unload from their vehicle, go inside of a building and navigate a place and a space that will not be easy for them to navigate. They named out loud, we love these boxes, it helps us. And yet this body has ignored those pleas. Furthermore, mobile voting sites, those roller voter polls that we have. Those polls historically have been used during early voting, and they have gone to places where people who have limited mobility and limited access to transit, where they can go and they can vote. Oftentimes those places have been parked outside of senior citizens' homes where we have people who we know can't get around as well. And yet this bill, once again, ignores the pleas and the calls of people with disabilities and says you can't use them except on election day. No more going to the places with the highest need. And then there's this final point that I, as a Southerner, and as a pastor, and as someone who cares for my neighbor, just cannot understand. We have made it illegal, illegal for someone to pass out some food to someone who is standing in line. Now, I know you're going to tell me, no, you just have to be 150 feet away. But the way that the bill reads, it says that you cannot give water or food or anything else, a poncho, an umbrella because it's raining. You can't give anything to anyone as long as you are within 25 feet of the line. So if the line goes beyond the 150 feet, you still have to be 25 feet away from the line, which means if I'm standing in line waiting to vote, and it's a long line, and I'm feeling a little faint, feeling a little hot, need a little nourishment because I've been in line for a long time. What it means is that the kind person who's been standing out there, who's got all the provisions that I need, they can't walk up to me and give it to me, even if I'm 150 feet away, because I'm still in line. So the person who is already feeling a little weak, oh, y'all, I'm preaching now. The person who is already feeling a little faint has to leave the line, go 25 feet or more beyond that line in order to just get a little nourishment, in order to just get a poncho to get out of the rain. To me, that is the most inhospitable thing that we could possibly do. It's to deny water, deny an extra chair to someone while they're sitting in a long line in the Georgia heat or in the midst of a downpour. This bill, we can talk about all of the ways that legally it's problematic, but I want to be clear that this bill has ignored the pleas and the needs of those who are living with disabilities in this community. They've come, they've been clear, they've named what they need, and you've ignored it. And this bill disenfranchises those who are already struggling the most. The poorest of the poor, the people who couldn't even afford a $5 ID. You've given them this other little plastic card, and because you simply wouldn't add another code section to include those IDs, you've now rendered their IDs null and void. Georgians, we can do better. We owe it to people who are already struggling to do all we can to make voting easier for them and never harder. And with that, I yield the well.
Chair recognizes the minority whip to speak to the motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be brief. There's obviously so many persons have already spoken eloquently, and much eloquently, really more than I can, about this bill and the many problems that it has. But I would say that at the end of the day, this will be a day, quite frankly, long remembered in the legislature. It is a day the legislature declared war on local control. Whether we're talking about determining how the legislature determining how counties spend their money, or how counties actually elect persons, not from a general standpoint, but specifically elect people. And with that, I turn to page 94, which talks about electing magistrate court judges. There's a provision in there which is directly, specifically targeted for Augusta, Georgia. Directly, specifically targeted at local control. The persons of Augusta, Georgia said that they wanted to have their chief magistrate appointed by the governor. They want their chief magistrate appointed by the governor, but they would like that person to come up for an immediate election. That's what Republicans and Democrats and others have lived under for years. But now all of a sudden, because of this new way we're doing things in the legislature, that we do not believe in local control anymore, that's now just a term of art that we have proven today does not exist. Does not exist from a general macro level. Now it does not exist from a specific, direct way persons vote for something as simple as a magistrate. And all because that we can do it. That is what we're going to rule the day on. When I got here and have been here, persons talk about the way that Democrats are treated. And they say, well, we were treated that way 20 years ago, whatever. But that's internal politics. It doesn't affect our constituents in reality. The things that we do here necessarily about, you know, how we debate things, or when we cut off debate, and where you guys cut off debate 10 years ago, and now we're cutting off debate, that's window dressing. Now we're actually talking about how you're going to spend your money, how you actually going to elect something as simple as a magistrate court judge. That affects your constituents. And it's something we're never coming back from. Today, we will not come back. And so 10 years from now, when you talk to your neighbors and friends, and they ask, why is that legislature telling us as a community we got to spend 5% more on the arts? Why is that legislature telling us how we can vote for something as simple as a magistrate court? It won't be any kind of theoretical or philosophical reason. The only thing that you will be able to tell them is, we did it to them, so they're doing it to us. But the difference is, it's being done to your constituents. This no longer is about internal things the way we do things here. This is now affecting Georgians on a day-to-day basis, not from a general macro level, but specifically now, this legislature has decided today, it's going to start really micromanaging counties. And that's not where we want to be. I trust my commission, even if I have disagreements with them. And I told somebody earlier, I don't want you guys telling us how to do every single thing we do in Augusta. And I don't think you want us telling you how to do everything in your community. But that is now where we are. And it's a day we're all going to regret. Thank you, and I yield the will.
Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the motion? Chair recognizes the senator from the 56th to close debate.
Thank you, Mr. President. The truth matters. We had a lot of folks come talk about this bill. And there's been a lot of bills, so I do understand there has been a lot of confusion. Some people came up today and cited things that are just not in this bill. The minority leader is a great leader and a friend. However, she brought up the fact that you're going to have a photo ID, and that is simply not true, and it is not in this bill. You're not going to have to make a copy of your ID. Also mentioned that voting hours were reduced. They were not reduced at all. Said we would reduce weekend voting. In fact, it has been expanded. These are just simply not true. We heard about water. Well, you have to be 150 feet away to do anything political. You can't have your signs there, you can't have people in shirts, but they can set up water stations anywhere up to the polls. So again, another comment that is just simply not true. Nobody has worked closer and done more at the special needs community in this chamber but me. Nobody has. Every voting machine has options to make that font larger and yet larger again. Each one of them do. And anyone in the special needs community, which I work with almost on a daily basis, is capable to pull up to any post office location or other mailbox to mail in an absentee ballot. So we have to get the facts right. The truth matters. The House and the Senate debated dozens of bills to assure security, transparency, and accountability in our elections. Many of the bipartisan ideas, some of your all's bills, are in this bill. The bill expands voting access in Georgia. Let me repeat that. This bill expands voting access in Georgia. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here talking about it. It expands weekend voting. It preserves no excuse absentee ballot. And it cleans up and modernizes an election code that has been woefully out of date. The truth matters. For those who believe our voting system is perfect and has no issues at all, like my friend from the senator from the 42nd, Let's go back to a few years ago when a lot of folks on the other side of the aisle thought it was broken, but now it's fixed. I always find it funny when both parties tend to have a problem with something when it affects them. But anybody who thinks that the last election didn't have some problems, whether it impacted the results or not, is living in another universe. The state of Florida is twice our population. They have 2 time zones. They are a much larger landmass. And by the end of Election Day, they can finish their elections process. But right here in Fulton County, Georgia, where we sit, 5 days after the election, they were still finding and counting votes. And that's not broken? How about the several counties that days after the election found missing votes, missing memory cards? This is a broken system. Countless thousands of Georgians requested absentee ballots that never came. In fact, everyone in this room got those emails and got those telephone calls. That many more people showed up to the ballot box to vote on Election Day and said you already voted, but they had not. I agree, people waited in line for hours, some people a day, and that's just wrong. Well, why did they wait in line all day? Because we had a sloppy, unorganized, overwhelmed process by people who were not doing their jobs very well. The truth matters. Let's keep the facts intact here. Real good performance by a lot of folks today. I'm sure the talking points were prepared a couple months ago. But nobody should be up here telling stories of falsehoods, sensationalizing and misrepresenting the truth. This bill expands voting access while adding much-needed security, accountability, and transparency. Let me say it one more time. The truth matters. I urge your favorable vote for the Election Integrity Act of 2021. I yield the well.
The senator from the 23rd has moved that the Senate agree to the House substitute to Senate Bill 202. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The Secretary will unlock the machine. Just to verify, vote yea or nay, not voice, say yea or nay. Point of clarity. For what purpose does the senator, he waves?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
I just want to make sure we're voting on the House substitute. We're not voting to end debate, correct?
That's correct. You're voting on the motion for the Senate to agree to the House substitute to Senate Bill 202. Have all senators voted? Have all senators voted? Mr. Secretary, please close the machine. On the passage of the motion, the yeas are 34, the nays are 20, and the Senate has agreed to the House substitute to Senate Bill 202. All right, at this time, we're going to take a 15-minute recess. We've got severe weather moving all across the state at this point. I know many of you are starting to get calls from back home from your districts. I want to take a 15-minute break, allow folks to call their families and constituents. And so we'll stand in recess for stand at ease for 15 minutes. Also would like to let you know that the dinner is here outside the chamber if you'd like to grab something. I'm not sure what we've got, but we've got dinner.